Again, we are at the top of the hour, so thank you all for joining us. My name is Heather Trout. I'm the supervisor of our virtual training production team here at Crucial Learning, and I'll be producing this webinar today. For everyone just joining, please use the chat feature for any responses or takeaways that you may have during our session. Please send your responses to everyone just so we can all benefit from any of your input. You can also send a message just to the host and panelists if you only want the panelists to see your responses. Also, please use that Q&A button to input any questions that you may have throughout our presentation. We'll try to answer them as we move through our time together. And if at any point you experience any audio or visual issues, feel free to send me a chat directly in that chat pod. Before I turn the time over to Scott Rabley, please note in the next day or so, we will send you a follow-up email with the recording from today's presentation. With that, I'm so excited to introduce our amazing speaker, Scott Rabley, to discuss our latest research on the cost of conversation failures and what they cost your organization. Clients describe Scott Rabley as the ultimate professional, a master trainer, and the director of professional services at Crucial Learning. Scott has more than 20 years of experience in education, training, and speaking, bringing a wealth of insight coupled with high energy to every engagement. Well, with that, I'll turn the rest of the time over to our wonderful speaker. Here is Scott Rabley.
Thank you, Heather, and welcome everybody. What an incredible global audience that we have here with us today as the numbers continue to climb. As Heather mentioned, we've had over 4,000 people register. We appreciate the time and investment that you're making to be here with us. Because of our global audience, I feel like I have to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you may be joining us. I feel like we've got you from all over the place. So we are so excited. It's been so fun to see the locations popping up into the chat pod, and I don't know about you, but every time I'm like, I'm from there. Thank you to our Anchorage, Alaska person. I was raised in Kenai. I'm Alaskan at heart, but I am joining you live from my home office here in Highland, Utah, which is just a little bit south of Salt Lake City if you've ever been out our way. But again, as they continue to fly in, so grateful to have so many of the names I recognize, some of our familiar friends. Thank you for taking time and joining us. We know your time is valuable. If you've ever participated in one of our Crucial Learning webinars, you know that this is not like a traditional webinar. This is not where you're just going to turn on the screen, listen. We're going to encourage you and invite you and hope and expect you to share, to participate. I'm a big believer that serving is learning. So thank you for already getting those fingers warmed up a little bit by sharing where you're located. There'll be many opportunities throughout our webinar today for you to share some thoughts and insights as we kind of dive into this idea of costly conversations and reveal some really interesting findings of our most recent research and why it is that employee silence is really wrecking the bottom line. So as Heather mentioned, there'll be opportunities for us to respond in the chat pod. We'll have some polls. It'll give us an insight of where we're at. And if you have any questions that we could answer, we've got a team behind the scenes that is here to answer those questions again and put those into the Q&A pod, not the chat pod. That way we'll try to respond to those questions. Well, before we dive into things, I want to make sure that I take a moment to just wish you all a very happy new year. Can you believe it's 2022? Oh my goodness, as we've come out of 2020, 2021, and now we are in 2022. I don't know about you, but it sure feels like just yesterday that we were kind of freaking out over Y2K. And here we are now 22 years later. You know, Heather was reading my intro and she says with more than 20 years, I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, oh, it's been way more than that, but I don't want to say that because that makes me feel so old. Well, as we begin to welcome in this new year and to get us into the mode of sharing and participating in polls, I have a poll I'd like to start out with, actually a couple of them to kind of get you engaged and to get some insight. So here's the first poll, and Heather, if you wouldn't mind pulling up that poll for us, I would love for you to, in this poll, I want you to just answer this question. Which word best describes your outlook for this new year? Now, I've given you just a few words, and so you can use one of those or select other. And if you do select other, give me another word in the chat pod. So which word best describes what your outlook for the new year. Is it hopeful? Is it nervous? Is it excited, anxious, prepared? I love that some of you are like, it's all of them. I'll give you just a quick second or two to respond in the poll there, and then I'll reveal the answers. That way you can see how your answers stack up to everybody else's. But there's some really great words going on in the chat pod. I should have had you. I should have called some of you. You are much better wordsmiths than I am. I was just trying to keep it a little bit simple and a little bit basic, right? And I love, if you're not doing so, you might want to kind of grab hold of the chat pod because it's filling up so quickly and just scan through some of the words. Let's go ahead and end the poll for now, Heather, and reveal what we came up with. Share those results if you wouldn't mind. So from my list of words, it looks like the majority of you are hopeful. That makes me so excited. And yet there's probably some elements of nervousness and some excitement. I love some of the responses. Tired, over it, done, cautiously optimistic. Absolutely. Well, regardless of your frame of mind and state of mind, our hope is that we'll give you some things that will help you to dive even more fully into your goals and things you have to accomplish, which leads me to my next question. So my next poll question, let's pop that one up there, Heather, if you wouldn't mind. My question is then, okay, regardless of your frame of mind, what aspects of your life are you most looking to improve in the new year? And you can choose multiple answers for this. This doesn't have to be just one answer. And again, I've only chosen a couple. If there's a couple others that you would include in the chat pod, feel free to do so. But I'm just kind of, thank you, Monica. There's a good one. Self-care. I love that. I kind of, in my mind, a little bit around the health aspect. Give a few more seconds for people to respond. Oh, thank you, Teresa. Way to rub it in. Way to rub it in. Retirement. Carrie, great word. I love that. Just have more fun, right? I love this. I see some great insights, collaboration, personal development, self-advocacy. Brenda, what a great insight. I love these. And let's go ahead in just a second here. I'll just wait a few more seconds, Heather, then we'll reveal what everyone else came up with. Let's go ahead and now reveal the answers, and let's see what we came up with. So it looks like, man, we're pretty spread across the board, but it looks like if we were to create a winner, it seems like the greater majority of us are saying, I want to really improve my health. I love that. Obviously, we can probably make improvements in, yes, Pamela, somebody did put housekeeping, and we probably all need to have that on our list, but appreciate someone calling that out specifically. Well, as you begin to think about this new year, as you begin to think about your mindset, as you begin to think about areas of focus and where we want to make changes and growth, as we begin to make our plans, and this is the time of year, right? We begin putting it down. We start writing it, crafting it, preparing, and making some really powerful decisions, goals, focuses, whatever that is for you. I want to invite you today to consider 2 words or principles to keep in mind. Now, I have 2 of my 4 boys are accountants. If someone would have told me I'd raise accountants, I would have told them they were crazy. So maybe this is a little bit of them spilling over into me. But the 2 words I want to invite us to think about as we approach this new year, as we look to celebrate victories and things we did well, as we reflect on misses and mistakes and lessons that we've learned, and then propel ourselves forward by making some goals and some focuses and decisions and aspirations and resolutions. Here's the 2 words I would invite that we keep in mind. And these 2 words are cost and price. Now, let's think about these 2 words. Now, by traditional definition, a cost is what we expend. It's the amount that we spend, right, to produce something, right? That might be time, it might be money, it might be energy, but a cost is the expense that we spend to produce something. Price then is what we pay. Typically we think about it in terms of monetary value, the amount of money or time maybe that we pay in exchange for something, okay? Now, that's the traditional sense, but of course there is a metaphorical sense when you think about these 2 powerful words of cost and price. Now, from a more metaphorical outlook, cost is the loss, it's the suffering, it's the burden, it's the cost of something, right? And the impact of, or the what we feel as the result. So that's a cost. And price, when we think about what is the price we pay, that might be seen as what's the sacrifice, what is the effort, or maybe even what is the investment that we need to make. Now, traditionally in the business world, when we look at our expense and our costs, we need the price, right, to match or overcome whatever cost so that it becomes beneficial. And the goal would be to make sure that whatever our cost, whatever we're expending, the price that we charge to pay for something overcomes or compensates for that cost. So as we begin to think about our reality right now, I want us to think about, what are the costs? What are the things that we're suffering? What are the burdens? What are the demands that we're feeling as a result of maybe our past, this past year, our efforts and what we've been doing? And then we begin to think about, okay, so what is the price? What is the price we need to pay to overcome whatever those costs are? And today we're going to look at both of those a little bit, particularly as they relate to conversations and the role that crucial conversations play, particularly in our organizational results and goals that we seek. Now, I want to start by looking at cost, and I want to share with you and engage you in some opportunity, if you will, to not only uncover but to discover some very powerful lessons that we learn through this cost analysis, if you will. So let's begin there. Now, you probably know that back in December of 2016, we did a study. We looked at, we surveyed over 1,000 respondents, and we got some very valuable information around costly conversations. We asked questions about what types of conversations, what are the most impactful conversations. We asked questions around, what do you see the impact, what are the costs, what are the time wasting, and to give us some of their insights as to what they feel, their inability or lack of ability, or to avoiding these kinds of conversations. And we discovered some really powerful truths that have helped guide us in terms of making some of those decisions. Well, this past December, 5 years later, we decided, what if we did it again? Let's replicate that study and see, where are we now 5 years later? And so here's what I'd like to do today with you in our short amount of time that we have together. What I'd like to do is, not all of the questions, but some of the questions, I want to ask you the very questions that we asked in this study. Give you a chance to respond. Then we'll reveal our answers so we can see how your individual answers compare to the collective group that's with us together. We have over 1,200 people, which is awesome. And then what I'd like to do is then take that and compare it to what we found in 2016 and how those numbers differ in 2021. And then by doing that, we'll uncover what we found so that we can discover lessons that we learn. And I'm going to invite you and encourage you to share some of the insights that the ahas and the takeaways as we begin to do this. So hopefully you're game to do this, because we're going to do it anyway, but I'm really excited to include you. So the first question that I want to ask, which is one of the very first questions we asked in the survey, we're going to pop up this poll. So Heather, if you'll pop up the poll for us, here's the question. I want you to think of crucial conversations in your organization that you or others didn't hold, put off holding, or didn't hold well, that resulted in poor outcomes. And I want you to mark all that you've seen in your workplace. Now, this isn't all it's not an all-inclusive list. As a matter of fact, I can only put 10 responses in our poll, but these are some of the most common responses. And let's see. So take a minute, choose all that reply. Which are you seeing the impact because of either we're not holding them, we're putting off holding them, we're not holding them well? I'll give you just a minute or so here to respond. I like to always get at least 50% of those that are participating responding, so it looks like the number's increasing. All right, the answers are flowing in. I'm about 45% of you have responded. Thank you for that. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so to look through these and to kind of get some insights. I always love this because I get a really good taste of where you're at. I think all training should be relevant, and this gives us a really reality check and see our relevancy and where we currently are. So it looks like we got about 75% of you that have responded. So let's go ahead and stop the poll for a moment, Heather, and let's go ahead and reveal the responses and see what we've come up with as what is our, now man, Can you ask for more equal distribution? I'm not sure that we can. I think if you look at some of the responses, it looks like the highest response was when someone performs below expectation, but that was followed very closely behind when someone isn't pulling their weight and when there's confusion on who owns a decision. That's been a kind of a recent discovery. Well, thank you for your participation. As you think about where you land, let me share with you what we found as we asked this question in our two surveys. So these are the top 6. And as you take a look in what you're noting, right, what do you see? Give me some quick thoughts in the chat box. Immediately, what is a takeaway, an aha that you see as we ask people, hey, which of these are you most commonly seeing? And particularly as we compare from 2016 to 2021. Thank you. Yes. What I love, right, is we've got this balance, right, because we see people saying, hey, we're seeing slight improvements. I mean, isn't that what we want? We want those numbers to start going down. Those percentages should be getting smaller and smaller. And so we are seeing some slight improvement, right? But the reality is still what? We're still struggling. We are still having some high issues that are impacting the results, right? And so we know that there are some severely heavy costs that are being paid in some of these specific areas. And what I loved a couple of you are noting is that it seems like a lot of these fall in the realm of accountability, don't they? And having those kinds of conversations. Excellent. Thank you for that. So that's a good warm up. So here's the next question. And this is going to be really a fun question. So here's the next. Let's pull the next poll up. I want you to look at the exact same list. And in your opinion, what is the costliest? If you look at, we all said which ones we're seeing, but which do you think is the costliest to the organization when it goes unresolved? Let me give you a minute or so to respond to that. So now you're going to make a deduction. You're saying, okay, we're seeing all of these conversations that are impacting us. What do you think is the costliest that's going unresolved? Jenny, that's a good question. We're going to get to that one in just a moment. Okay. Well, I promise you, I got an insight that I'll share with you that will answer that question. Again, I love to see these numbers quickly coming in. So this is tough. I get it. It's not an easy choice. Some of them are so close, but if you had to choose one, they all are costing, right? They all have the cost. They're weighing on us. But which would you think is the costliest that we see here? Got just another 30 seconds, maybe. Give a few more opportunity to respond. I'm seeing some great insights in the chat pod as well. Thank you. Keep those coming. Those are great insights. Yes, David. When leaders are failing to lead is a costly experience as well, and how they lead. Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're at that 75 threshold, so let's go ahead and stop just so we can move forward and continue here. So let's go ahead and share that results. Let's see what we came up with. Always, again, look at that split. Really difficult to kind of try to decide. But for us, the one that had the largest number of responses was when someone shows disrespect towards another in the workplace. Isn't that interesting? And let me share with you what came out from our two. This is fascinating. And what I really appreciate is that, and no surprise, that our responses are aligning up pretty well with the 2021 responses. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a word jumble. There's a lot of words on the screen, so I'll give you a minute to digest this. But when you take a look at those answers that we just gave and we compare them to the answers we received in 2016 and 2021, take a look at what do you notice? What ahas are you seeing? Right? And this goes back to a comment Jenny had made in the chat pod just a little bit earlier, right? We have a new number one, right? We still have some very, very costly conversations, and we have a new number one. As a matter of fact, a number one that wasn't even in the top 5 years ago. And that top one is that when someone shows disrespect for another in the workplace. Question, why do you think that's jumped to number one? Any thoughts? Okay, some great insights. It's contagious. It could be, when you think about where we are right now, And as we are in the midst of a lot of political differences, religious differences, diversity and equity, all these things, societal issues that we're seeing are making it very difficult for us to speak and have those kinds of conversations. And then you throw in the midst a remote environment, which it makes it a lot more difficult and maybe in some ways easier to be disrespectful. I think that was an interesting discovery and takeaway for me as well, to see, yes, we are still struggling with the same types of issues that we did 5 years ago, although we're seeing maybe them not as frequently reported, but they're still having a huge impact. So great takeaways. Thank you for what you're sharing. Now, I'm not going to go to a poll for these next couple, but I want to share some things and we'll bring you back into the engagement in just a moment. Another one of the things that we did is we asked people, well, what are you doing instead? Right? If you're not having these conversations, what are you doing? And what was interesting is the numbers between 2016 and 2021 were almost identical. There was absolutely no change in the percentages statistically to make a difference. We still saw a higher percentage of people who are saying they're complaining to others. They're doing unnecessary work. They're ruminating about the problem. But what was interesting that was inserted into the 2021 that we found was that 44% said that they are actually talking around the problem. That's one of the things that they're doing. Now, I want you to think about, are these helpful? Are these moving things forward? They're not. And what I really found interesting and intriguing about this result here, as we look at, hey, we're still doing some of the less than helpful activities, but when you insert this idea of talking around the problem, I wonder if maybe we have this false sense of reality that we are talking about it because we think we're addressing it. And so in some ways, maybe we feel like we're okay. And when really that we're not stepping up, we're not speaking up. As we dove into the questions around costs, we asked them to estimate. Now, keep in mind, we understand there's no calculation, there's no formula. This is just asking people to estimate what are some of the time costs and monetary costs to these kinds of avoidances. And one of the questions that we asked them was, how much time do you waste avoiding these kinds of conversations? And what was interesting is that we saw a higher percentage of people saying they waste a day and they waste a week. And there were even 6% of the people said they wait 6 months said that they waste. But the most telling differential was between this stat of 2 weeks. We went from about 40% of the people responding in 2016 that say they waste up to 2 weeks' time avoiding these conversations to now it's 50%, right? And so as we begin to think about that significant increase, that we're seeing that we're not doing these things, we're complaining, we're ruminating, we're talking around the problems, but we're wasting up to 2 weeks of time. Think about that cost. Think about the impact that is on the workforce and the desired results that you seek in your organization, and how that impacts staff attrition, retaining, training, losing trained, skilled. Absolutely, these all have those impacts. Then we ask the question, okay, that's how much time, how much money do you estimate is being lost or the cost of this kind of avoidance? And again, we saw high percentages of people saying it's cost thousands of dollars, but this one was really telling to me. We saw a complete, absolute stay still at people saying it is costing organizations $50,000 or more by not having these conversations. And when you throw in some of the things that you're sharing in the chat pod and the impacts of those, like retention and employee training and onboarding and all the costs that go into that, it's no wonder that people are estimating. They're not a firm calculation or no formula, but they're beginning to say that, guess what? These things are costing us time and money by not stepping up and speaking up to these conversations. Well, let's engage you a little bit more. Let me ask you another question. Let's go to this poll question. Because once we saw the costs and the time wasted and the money and what the conversations were, we then shifted to them as individuals. And we asked them, how skilled do you consider yourself and others in your organization to be at having these work-related cultural conversations. So let's go ahead and give a chance here to respond. Now, notice we got not skilled at all, a bit skilled, moderately skilled, very skilled, or extremely skilled. So again, this is a measurement of how skilled they feel like they are and the people around them in their organization. And so kind of curious as to where you feel you and your people in your organization land in terms of their ability to have these kinds of conversations. Because one of the things we also learned while you're answering this is that we are seeing a little bit of an uptake percentage-wise in reporting of cultures supporting dialogue, cultures supporting crucial conversations. So we are seeing an increase where people are saying culturally, we are being more encouraged to have these conversations than we've had in the past. But now we're talking, okay, encouragement is one thing, ability is another thing. And so let's see how you come in here. So I'm getting about 70% of you. And, you start thinking about, and I appreciate some of the insights in the chat pod in terms of as you think about kind of the different types of tiers, frontline leaders, those kinds of things. All right, we're out 75. Let's go ahead and reveal the answers there, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for continuing to support this little exercise. So take a look. Where do we land? It seems like the majority of us here on this webinar of nearly 1,300 people are saying we don't feel that we're very skilled. And if we are, we've got moderate skills. So, 50% saying moderate. And again, that's all interpretive, right? And what that really means. But interesting to say we have very little people that are saying we are feeling very skilled and extremely skilled. And again, here's the interesting insight. So if we kind of take a look at what we found, look at these numbers. What do you notice based upon the 2016 findings and the 2021 findings? What are you seeing? If you look at like I am, what do you notice in terms of what we reported and also whatever? Yeah, we're seeing a little bit lower. If you look at some combinations, it's relatively similar, not a lot of changes, but the overall takeaway is that maybe people feel a little more skilled. But we wonder, and my question is, what does that mean? Is that mean because they're talking around it, they feel like they are? But it's always interesting. But we do see the extremes as both higher, that we're seeing more people saying they're not skilled, and yet more people saying that they are very, very skilled. Well, skill is one thing. Confidence is another thing. So let me ask you this question, because this is another question that we asked our study. How confident are you at having this work-related conversation? And I think confidence comes into play both skill and culture. I think you have to think about those two aspects, like what's my ability, and does the culture encourage and support and promote and allow these kinds of conversations, I think will impact how confident we feel that we can have. So give you a minute here to respond to how confident do you think you are and those around you at having these, and let's see what we came up with. Yeah, man, these insights, I'm going to look forward to going back and reading through these comments, because some very powerful nuggets and discoveries. Thank you for all of the contributions that you're making. This really makes it such a beneficial experience for everybody. So we're getting close to about 70% of you. I'll give you just another 10 seconds or so. Again, the variant between skill and confidence may be impacted by the culture a little bit. So, all right, let's go ahead and reveal the answers there, Heather. Thank you, Heather. And so let's see what we've come up with. So, and according to us, we're feeling, again, very similar to our skills, but it looks like what's interesting is if you compare the moderately, where we had 50% of us said we were moderately confident, skilled, but now only 43% of us are saying that we're not, because maybe we've got more of a very confident percentage, that 18% versus what we had in skill, may mean we are reaping the benefit of cultural encouragement, if you will. So I think that's a really good insight as we begin. And then again, if you look at what we found between 5 years ago and today, notice the numbers, right? We're seeing that, we have a little bit more confidence, but for the most part, our confidence is remaining the same. And again, I think confidence is a result of both ability and cultural encouragement. So, yeah, absolutely. Confidence may not always have to do with that. Good response there. Well, the last thing I kind of want to share with you is we then ask the question around, what do you see as the negative consequences of all this, right? What is the real impact? We've looked at cost, time wasted, money expended, right? We've looked at what conversations are most prevalent. We've looked at skill and confidence and their abilities to do so. Well, then we ask the question about, well, what do you see as the real negative consequences? And what was interesting is there was no change. There was no real statistical change between what they reported in 2016 and what they reported 5 years later. And they all reported very high numbers. And many of you have already noted these in the chat pod. What are the negative consequences? Employee morale engagement is low, damaged relationships, corporate culture, and some missed targets and goals, right? And there's no doubt that a lot of these things are impacted by circumstances. We're in completely different circumstances than we were 5 years ago, but we are still reaping the negative consequences that and the costs, if you will, of avoiding these conversations. And as we begin to think about our own costs, what are the costs that we're expending because we're not having these conversations? I'd like to pause here for just a moment and see if you can share with me, from just this brief little introduction, your answers compared to some of our survey answers, what do you think are some of the lessons or some of the takeaways that we can glean from comparing these numbers, our numbers with 5 years ago and with even today? Give me some, I'd love to see some of your thoughts now in the chat pod before I share maybe some of my takeaways, some of the things that I learned, right? Oh, excellent. Good insight, David. Absolutely. And no doubt, William, I think we can all conclude that communication is important. It's crucial, to use one of our words. Yes, I think great insight. We are seeing some improvement, but we have a long ways to go. We can't afford the cost of putting it off. Thank you for that insight. I hope you're grabbing hold of the chat pod as it's filling up and seeing some of these great insights, right? That maybe we're seeing even though we feel skill, we lack the skills, right? Are we getting the buy-in and commitment to overcome the costs, right? We need to speak up. And a great point was made there in the chat pod. I'm sorry it's moving so quickly. I'm not grabbing names as quickly, but please know when we talk about conversations, we're not just referencing speaking. Listening becomes such an important component in this. And are we listening? Are we valuing each other, right? Right. And thank you. Not only are we seeing the impact on, organizational well-being, but also personal well-being and health. And imagine avoiding these things, what it does to us physically, right? And great insights, safety, the role that social media play, the ability we have now virtually to maybe speak in different ways. In some ways, conversations become much more formalized because it's from a remote environment. We've lost some of that casualness and ability to speak. And so that ups the ante a little. It makes the stakes a little bit higher. And what a great question, Angela. Are we really making an individual effort to make these changes? Well, alongside of you, some of my key lessons and takeaways is that conversations are costing more time and more money even today because of its impact and the cost. And the other great lesson was that we are feeling a little bit more skilled and a little more confident in our ability to speak up and the culture to do so. But the bottom line is that we aren't. We aren't speaking up. We're not. And not only are we not speaking up, now today we are actually more likely to resort to those unhealthy behaviors that we referenced earlier. And so I love this quote from Joseph Grinney, one of our authors and founders. He says, one of the costliest barriers to organizational performance is unresolved crucial conversations. I want you to think about that for a minute. Let me read it to you again. One of the costliest, again, we're talking about cost, the impact, the burden, right? One of the costliest barriers to organizational performance, and we could even include in that individual performance, is unresolved crucial conversations. And it stems from a lot of things. It stems from a culture that is still embracing it. It stems from our skills and our abilities. So we've talked today just briefly to this point about what are the costs. And I think we can all agree that we are all enduring the expenses, right, of and the cost of avoiding these conversations. And so now what I'd like to do is just for a few minutes, turn our thoughts and our mind towards the price. If price needs to offset the expense, right, the cost of what we're doing, we have to figure out what is the sacrifice, what is the effort, what is the payment, or maybe we could even use the word investment. What is the investment that we need to make individually, collectively, organizationally to offset these costs that we've identified? And so if it's okay with you today, I would like to suggest 4 potential investments that you can make for holding crucial conversations. They're very general, but they can apply to any circumstance. So the very first investment I'd like you to think about is this idea of reversing your thinking. When we step back and ask ourselves, why are we not stepping up and holding these conversations, right? Yes, we can talk about cultural norms, we can talk about skills and abilities, but one of the biggest barriers is that we do the wrong cost analysis, right? Typically, what we do is we ask ourselves, do we think this conversation will go well, right? And we look at the risk of speaking up. What will happen if I do? But rather, if we reverse that thinking, which we've tried to help you do through all this analysis to this point, is to ask yourself, what is the risk of not speaking up? What are the costs? We tend to look at the cost of what happens if I do. But what if we don't? And so my invitation is for you to invest in the conversation. Don't let the risk of speaking up and that cost outweigh the cost or risk of not speaking up. Because I think what we've all concluded already, that there is greater risk, there are greater costs to us not having the conversation. And so I think we need to invest in the conversation itself. We need to be willing to make a payment to say, I'm going to have that conversation, right? We need to stop analyzing it in the wrong way and reverse our thinking and make sure that we are investing in the conversation itself. So investment number 1 is in the conversation. Now, number 2, what I would suggest is that we need to somehow change our emotions. I mean, think about when you're confronted with any of these kinds of situations that we've been talking about. There's these feelings of irritation, getting angry, disgusted. And these emotions, as we know, show up in our words. I've always believed that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And so if we can look through a different lens to create different emotions. And I love this thought, get curious, not furious. Don't let emotions drive these conversations, because it's the emotions that lead us to the unhealthy behaviors. And so the second investment is to invest in yourself, to make sure that you are removing the emotion from the equation, that you're allowing yourself a space to be curious and not furious, that you're investing in yourself in a place that you are bringing your very best self to the conversation, free of stories, free of emotion, so that you can then engage in the conversation that you're investing in. So investment number 1 was to invest in the conversation. Investment number 2 is to invest in yourself. Make sure that you are managing those emotions, that you're seeing through a proper lens, that you become more curious than furious. Now, investment number 3 is all about safety. I have so appreciated, as I've scanned the chat over the last few minutes, many of you have referenced this idea of psychological safety, emotional safety, or just safety in general, the ability and comfort to be able to step up and speak up. We've learned over 3 decades plus of studies, right, that people become defensive and avoid dialogue when they don't feel safe, right? And so I think one of the things we've got to do is learn how to create safety, learn how to share intentions. We've heard it said before, people don't get defensive by what you say. they get defensive by why they think you're saying it. And so one way that we can create safety is to create a culture where we, specifically as leaders and influencers, are declaring and sharing our good intentions and our respect for each other. We have to invest in the culture. We have to invest in a culture that says we want diversity, not just in representation, but in contribution. We want everyone's eye. We want to create a space where we have the right intentions, where we can be open-minded. The other day I was listening to a bit of optimism, a podcast by Simon Sinek, and his guest was Brene Brown. And I got so lost in that I wasn't paying attention to what they were really talking about, because I got so caught up in the fact that they were disagreeing in a way that was healthy, that they had this space of safety, that they didn't see things exactly the same, and they were able to add meaning and share. And through that effort and that energy, it created so much more learning for me. I didn't focus on, well, what was she saying? What is he saying? They collectively, with different opinions and diverse inputs, kind of created a greater learning experience for me. Friends, we've got to invest in the culture. We've got to create a culture of safety. And it was so refreshing to hear at least people report currently in this state that they're seeing an increase in their culture of support and encouragement for crucial conversations. We all can agree and realize that it's not enough to just promote it. We can't just encourage it. We almost have to expect it. We have to invest in the culture. Many of you may be familiar with my great friend and boss, Emily Gregory. I have the wonderful opportunity not only to work alongside of her and with her, but I get to report to her. And I get to have one-on-ones with her. And not too long ago, we had a one-on-one, and in a very healthy place, she said to me, Scott, I've noticed over the last little bit that you don't often challenge me. She says, you don't often push back, and you seem to agree quite a bit. And I was like, well, my first response was, well, I want you to know, it's not that I don't feel like I can't. I just feel like we're kind of very similar minded, and we kind of think the same. And then she said this to me. She says, well, if we both think the same, maybe one of us isn't needed. I will push back. I will look for opportunities. But what I so appreciated was her investment in our culture. Her investment in saying we want a culture that doesn't just readily agree. Not that we don't want to get to a place of alignment and agreement, but we want to have opportunities to discuss, to share, to push, to challenge, to learn. I will forever be grateful that I get to work in an environment where it's culturally safe, not just promoted and encouraged, but expected for us to share and to offer our inputs. So investment number 3 is to invest in your culture. Now, the final thought I'd give to you here in terms of investments would be this idea of inviting dialogue. And this goes a little bit along the lines with the story I just shared with Emily. But I think the goal here is to express our concerns in a way that encourages other people to do the same. Emily was investing not only in the culture that we were creating so that we can push back and challenge, but she was investing in me. Probably one of the biggest investments that we can make, that we can bring to the table to help us overcome the costs that we are experiencing in avoiding crucial conversations, is the investment that we make in other people. The investment that we make when we say, I care about you, I want to hear what you have to say. I'm going to suspend my own feelings, my own thoughts, my own ideas to simply learn and to simply understand. And when we make that kind of investment, think about the return. Think about the return that we get from that investment. We overcome many of the costs, the natural consequences that we're experiencing simply by making some of these investments that we must make. So, we've got to invest in the conversation. Be committed to having that conversation. Don't let yourself, the costs of having the conversation outweigh the costs of not having the conversation. We've got to invest in ourselves. We've got to make sure we're taking the right time and focus to bring our very best self into that conversation. We can't afford the emotions that are caused by some of these very big and very real challenges that we face. So make that investment in yourself to make sure that you're not allowing the emotions to get in the way. We've got to invest in our culture. We've got to invest in creating a space of safety where everyone can feel safe making their contributions. And we've got to invest in others. We've got to let them know that we value what they have to offer, and make sure that we, in some ways, almost expecting them to offer their insight and not just challenging. And there's no doubt that how do we make these kinds of changes? What do we need to do? Friends, it starts with us, right? We can talk about the organizational payments, the investments that need to be made, but imagine that organizational culture is really the product of individual behaviors. What each individual does collectively creates the culture and the norms and the expectations in organizations. So why not let that culture start with us? Let us be the leaders that we want our people to be. Let us be the parents that we want our children to be. Let us lead by example by making these kinds of investments. And I'm noticing some really, really great insights coming in. I love that. Thank you for sharing those. Now, here's what I want to do as we kind of begin this idea, we start kind of wrapping things up a little bit. I want you to think about something for a minute. I did an interesting thing the other day, and I just Googled top organizational challenges in 2021. Okay, and there were lots of different lists. And as I kind of went to the different lists put on by different organizations, there were a few that kind of just surfaced to the top that were seen to be repeated and kind of seemed to be the biggest and most prevalent challenges that we faced in 2021. And here's the list. And again, many of you have noted these things already in the chat pod. Employee engagement, managing relationships, talent retention, diversity, equity, inclusion. Embracing continual change was an interesting one. Employee health and burnout. And then managing a remote or hybrid workforce. As you think about that list, it's a pretty inclusive list there, right? But not all inclusive. What is your biggest challenge? Let's go and put it in the chat pod. What do you think, again, what is your biggest organizational challenge? What keeps you up at night? What are the things that one thing on this list, and maybe there's another one that's not on this list, that's fine too. But I love to kind of get your thought in the chat pod. And again, I encourage each one of you to grab hold of the chat pod as it's flowing and take a look at some of these insights. As I'm doing my speed reading, I'm seeing a lot of messages for burnout, kind of thinking about the health and well-being of our employees. Thank you for that, and how that fits to that hybrid remote workforce. I'm seeing a lot of managing relationships, which becomes a real challenge in today's world, particularly when there's a little bit of a alignment between some of these. Some of these things kind of work together, right? Managing relationships obviously impacts employee engagement and may impact in talent retention. But it looks like there's some other things coming in here like office politics, creating that kind of cultural safety, managing relationships. Again, these are all of the challenges which we are facing, and that we have to, obviously, if we're facing them in 2021, they're going to continue to be those challenges as we move into the new year. So let me kind of wrap things up with a question. And as you think about your organizational challenges, as you think about your personal and individual challenges that you're facing as you embark on another trip around the sun, if you will, let me ask you this question. How many of your organizational challenges will be solved without talking about them? I'm not a mathematician, but I'm pretty confident that I can pull the data on this one, right? So when we stop to think about if we are going to overcome or at least improve the organizational and personal challenges that stand in our way, we have got to be able to talk about them. We have got to be able to step up and speak up to these conversations. Well, we've talked a lot about the cost. We've talked about some personal investments that we can make and the price that needs to be paid. My hope now is that you'll be even more curious as to how Crucial Conversations can help you overcome these challenges, overcome the costs that you're experiencing. So here's my invitation. My invitation is for you to join us upcoming. We have 2 virtual course previews up and coming where we are going to preview the Crucial Conversations course. We are going to show you what it entails, how does it work, what are the benefits, and give you a taste of the course. We have one on January 13th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, and we have one coming up on February 23rd, which is 9 a.m. Mountain Time. Now, you can scan these QR codes, and that will take you to our registration page so you can register for this free course preview, or you can see that Heather, my great friend Heather, thank you Heather, has put in the chat pod the links so that you can register as well. So either way, you can use the QR code or you can use the links that were just provided. Friends, I want to thank you for your contribution, for your engagement, for helping not us to only uncover, but to discover some of the great lessons that we need to learn as we look to figure out what investments we need to make to overcome our costs as we move into what I hope is an epic 2022. So thank you, everybody. Heather, back to you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott, for your wonderful presentation today. As a reminder to you all, in the next day or so, we'll send you an email with the link and a recording to this presentation for you to review and share as well. As Scott mentioned, these skills were taken from the Crucial Conversations courses, which are available in a variety of learning formats, including on-demand, virtual, and in-person. For more information, you can visit our website, cruciallearning.com, or register for one of our upcoming virtual course previews, where you can get a sample of our Crucial Conversations courses. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.